He titled it My Twisted World. Elliot Rodger, the 22-year-old suspected of killing 7 people and injuring 13 others before dying himself, possibly of a self-inflicted gunshot wound, tells his story of a life of starvation and yearning in this 140-page document. It chronicles how the more lonely I felt, the more angry I became, leading him to settle on a plan for a day of retribution. The details of the life story he published online are unverified, and it's not clear what of what he wrote is true or fantasy. Mr. Rodger was born in London on July 24, 1991, to Hollywood director Peter Rodger and Lee Chin, who, when he turns 5 years old, relocate to Los Angeles. He describes his early years as one of the best periods. Life was fair and life was satisfying. At age 7, his parents divorce. His 9th year, he himself sees the seeds of his despair being planted, writing, "The time of fair play was at its end." He's the shortest child in his class and feels different from the cool kids who seem to be more admirable than everyone else. In an effort to be cool himself, he says he gets a skateboard. As a 6th grader, he attends the school dance, and some of the 7th and 8th grade girls offer to dance with him. All of the pretty girls had a peculiar habit of hugging boys they knew as a form of greeting, and some of them hugged me. I didn't understand why, but it felt like the best thing ever. But he says he's already been labeled as a quiet kid. It's 2002. He joins AOL chat rooms, which he says temporarily filled the social void. But at school, an incident happened that would scar me for life. He accidentally bumps a pretty girl. She cursed at me and pushed me, embarrassing me in front of my friends. It made him feel like an insignificant, unworthy little mouse. At age 12, he writes, he sees a pornographic video online for the first time. Finding out about sex is one of the things that truly destroyed my entire life. But I would never get it. Not getting any sex is what will shape the very foundation of my miserable youth. He acknowledges his world is growing darker. He writes that he starts to act weird and annoying to people just to gain attention, and experiences more painful rejection. Being teased and ridiculed by a girl I had a crush on wounded me deeply. He says he didn't want to give any thought to it. That's why I immersed myself entirely into my online games like World of Warcraft. I felt safe there. At 14, he writes that he enters a Catholic all-boys school. He says he's bullied and called faggot. They threw food at me during lunchtime and after school. It enraged me, but I was too scared to do anything about it. At the same time, he's going through puberty. This was the start of hell for me. Going through puberty utterly doomed my existence. It condemned me to live a life of suffering and unfulfilled desires. He writes that his parents transfer him to a different school, where he recalls making this observation: the most meanest and depraved of men come out on top, and women flock to these men. Their evil acts are rewarded by women, while the good, decent men are laughed at. I hated the girls even more than the bullies because of this. He writes that he's taken out of the new school and enters a continuation high school, which operates like homeschooling, spending only 3 hours per day there. Then at 17, he writes that he visits a young man, a couple years older, who he says had been an exchange student in his father's house, describing him as the only popular young person who ever reached out to me. The experience of being out with him socially really turned my whole world around. He writes that when he returns to California his senior year of high school, he becomes immersed in playing online games with 3 other boys. We had so many adventures in World of Warcraft as a group, and yet I felt like the outcast of the group. Because he says he found out the 3 of them would have meetups at one of their houses and not invite him. So he gives up the game and says he spends most of his time reading books about history, politics, and sociology. I began to have fantasies of becoming very powerful and stopping everyone from having sex. I wanted to take their sex away from them, just like they took it away from me. At 19, he writes that he enrolls in a class at another community college. His primary social interaction at this point is with a friend in his karate class. He writes, I thought that he would relate to me since he was also a virgin and had no girls in his life, but some of the things I said began to disturb him. One night he told me with a lot of distress that enough was enough. He didn't want to hear it anymore. Mr. Rodger writes that he moves to an apartment in Santa Barbara. There, his jealousy of his peers takes a racial tone in his writings. Ugly black boy be able to get a white girl and not me? At a Starbucks, he writes that he acts out his anger following out of the store a couple he witnessed kissing passionately. He says he follows them to their car and splashes his coffee all over them. Reflecting afterwards, it was around this point in my life that I realized I was capable of doing such things. I would happily do such things. I was capable of killing them, and I wanted to. In the spring of 2013, he comes across a website, a forum full of men who are starved of sex, just like me, he says. Many of them share my hatred of women, though unlike me, they would be too cowardly to act on it. He discloses for the first time that he was seeing a psychiatrist, but doesn't say when that treatment began or ended. One night, he says, he works up the courage after a few drinks to crash a wild house party on Del Playa Drive, a hub of off-campus life for students at the University of California, Santa Barbara. It ends badly. He says he got beaten up. He says his leg is broken. He He turns 22. The details of his alleged attack are being planned. First, I need to buy a third handgun just in case one of them jams. I need 2 working handguns at the same time, as that is how I plan to commit suicide. Here's how Mr. Roger ends my twisted world. Humanity struck at me first by condemning me to experience so much suffering. I will punish everyone, and it will be beautiful. Finally, at long last, I can show the world my true worth.